right. All right. It's New Year. It's a new us. This is Jay in Washington's. You can't make this shit up. I am your host, David Washington. Our other host is Joel Hawksley. Say good morning, Joel.
Good morning. Look, I shave and you don't, so it's like a whole brand new year. So, well, thank
I
you,
figure
David.
I'll try something different. It won't last too long, but once in a
I
while, I
thank
want
you.
to, mix
I
it up.
thank you I thank you as always, David. This is a great episode that you put together for us today. So, you can't make this shit up. It's going to be a good episode. So tell us what's
Indeed.
going on.
Okay, so the Keep Floridians Housed Act, House Bill 985, was introduced by Representative Anna Eskamani and State Senator Victor Torres. This legislation is a comprehensive housing reform bill aimed at supporting Florida renters amidst a housing crisis. It emphasizes tenant needs over landlord and developer interests, contrasting Governor DeSantis' approach. Key elements include strengthening tenant protections, outlawing predatory landlord practices, reducing initial rental costs, reforming eviction laws for fairness, promoting housing affordability, and offering special provisions for victims of domestic and sexual violence. The act also proposes an executive agency for housing and tenant laws and a pathway for eviction record sealing. Let's go. That's a lot. This is epic legislation. Joel, your initial reaction here.
Oh, this legislation's dead on arrival. I mean, absolutely dead on arrival. Love Anna's excitement. Love the whole wanting to get stuff done, but there's just absolutely. We live in a free society, and freedom to uh, ownership of property and to be able to free market. Uh, this is an invasion. This is invasion on first it's government overreach. Uh, its impact on property owners is um, insane. Uh, it takes away market-based solutions to the problem. It its unintended consequences, capping security deposits and limiting eviction, uh, and concealing the concealing of the evictions as I understand it. The economic impact is going to skyrocket prices instead of reducing prices in rental. It takes total local control away, and it takes property rights away. So, just if you look at how the conservatives are going to look at this legislation and how people, Anna Eskamani, is she willing to do the same for herself if she owned a nice piece of property and she's basically wants to rent that property out as a second income so she can get her doctorate degree that she's been working on forever because she's too busy with legislation like this to go to UCF and finish the doctorate degree. I want to see
Yes.
Dr. Anna Eskamani graduate from UCF, okay? Instead of putting forth legislation that attacks people, right? She wants it to be for the people, but she attacks people in the same sense.
Well, she's
Don't you dare try to rent your property. Don't you dare try to be market, driven. And as a matter of fact, why don't you just give us your property and we'll manage it for you? This is ridiculous legislation for a ridiculous problem that we have. It is a problem, but we're not delving into the problem.
mhm.
We're just creating more issues around the problem. Let's take the focus on how can we reduce these costs.
Yeah.
How can we
And
reduce these costs? Let's reduce the insurance. We talked about it, David, and
yes, we have.
you and I have talked about it. Democrats, if they really wanted an issue, they have an issue. Get off of the this housing issue, and get onto the insurance issues that's creating the problem that is being passed on to the consumer. That's the problem. We have to say insurance companies are leaving in droves because
Right.
of hurricanes, because of with what we have in the state of Florida is too risky for them. So we need an alternative. Now,
Ooh.
conservatives are no better, but this legislation, Anna, get a good night's sleep and think of a better approach than to go into the pocket of hardworking Americans that are trying to give people a place to live. You're forcing their hand by not dealing with the problem, as Republicans are not dealing with the problem. I'll take on my own party, David, but I
Yes.
love this legislation. I love you bringing this up because it gives me a chance to say, conservatives, this legislation wouldn't be presented if we would fix the problem.
That's a good point. It's a lot to unpack there. First, in respect to Representative Eskamani, she is finishing her dissertation on the federal government's COVID response to its constituents seeking assistance.
So
So
she's
first,
changed. So she's changed it like how many times because she's been
I don't know.
she's been working on it for
It's
years.
her dissertation. Um,
I love it.
my first reaction to seeing this legislation, it was wow, this is epic, and it's good to see Senator Victor Torres and Representative Eskamani get together and work on this. When this particular episode is posted for broadcast, uh, it will tag their Twitter accounts or X accounts to let them know that we are discussing this, and I will also reach out to both offices to determine if they would like to be interviewed in regards to this legislation. I think it is a good step in moving the conversation further. I have some concerns too, especially the costs to the renter, um, the unintended costs that will prevent more potential renters from renting here in Florida. I'm very concerned about that. I'm even more concerned about the creation of another office. You know how I feel about another office
Hmm.
of accountability, bureaucracy. The Us liberals, Democrats, we have a tendency to always want to rush to another meeting, creating another organization or group or office to tackle issues that are that are not unknown to the larger community. We had the same issue in regards to the legislation to create a special office to address artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence in state governments. Like, let the
Yeah,
Fed
the
handle
Supreme
it.
Court. Listen, the Supreme Court's now in on the AI conversation. If you haven't noticed, so there's there's another topic for another day. So yeah, David, I there's a lot to unpack, and I appreciate the efforts, but have we looked at um, reaching out to businesses to find out what their uh, results are going to be with all these high rises that are going empty? Have they started to discuss whether there's an opportunity that these could be transformed into uh, housing and maybe be even affordable because the amount of uh, space that's available right now? I, I'm just speculating because I don't do that for a living. What I do is I say that I'm watching a lot of people work from home nowadays. I'm watching a lot of people not in these offices, and I'm trying to figure out how long can you heat, air condition, or do have these spaces empty. John Micah attacked this in the government, with the fact that we had so many government buildings that just sat there empty. But because the government has to do their part, they had to make sure that they heat them, cool them, everything else. He brought everybody to the, as you call it, the Trump hotel at the time. It was the post office. The dead of winter, John Micah brings them to a meeting in the building with no heat and said, "This is our problem." And we did. We started to rent those properties. We started to, either sell them or get use for them. That's the issue now. We should be looking at how do we transition more housing in the area for and in a cost for the type of work that we have presented down here. I, I don't see any business not you know not wanting to do something to make money.
I applaud the effort to submit this type of legislation and start attacking these issues, particularly affordability, addressing the housing affordability trust fund. I am concerned about one aspect of the proposed legislation, and allowing tenants to spread out their security deposit. You and I, we've rented in the past, we've had mortgages in the past, and I think that's a slippery slope there. If you're unable to have that down payment, that security deposit, um, maybe it's not the right place for you to move into. I think that's taking responsibility away from the tenant and putting more risk on the landlord or the rental management company.
Mhm.
Um, and how does that work out? Who's responsible for keeping track of that? Um, would that be something that becomes predatory if the landlord or the rental management company allows this and they manage this process? Can
Mhm.
they add interest to that? Can they manipulate this in the fact where it becomes predatory in nature and costs the tenant that much more?
Well, well,
It,
remember, David, you're on a good point because they're not they have to take that they have to take that deposit and they have to secure it, right? They're not allowed to spend it. It's not like it's money that you give them and they can spend it. They have to place that in in a bank, and it has to be. It's not to be spent. So it's not something that, hey, your landlord's spending it. What we could attack, and I've always wondered, if you have that down payment and you have that, deposit, and then you end up trying to get into 10 different properties, you've just spent $500 of you probably spent $500 of your deposit just on applications. F the applications. Stop passing that on to the person. If you're going to
right.
use
Yeah.
all these different, if you're going to use all these different companies to do credit checks and to do all that stuff, you pay for it. You pay for it. That should be on you, the landlord or the you know agency. It's on you. Screw this. If you want to tell somebody, hey, one thing you shouldn't have is an application fee. Period. If you want somebody to apply to be in that property, allow it to be open and free. You take on that responsibility. Now, I have no problem telling somebody that you can't pass that on to the consumer because it's your property, it's your risk. You need to do you need to pay for that. And that's what I mean, yes, I'm a conservative, but I also understand if they're going to have a deposit, people don't always have the extra money to lose because you decided to say no. And you may have already said no before they even applied. You may not even have the property available, but
Right.
because you have that $50, you have that $50 fee, you're just going to be gouging people on property. There's no guarantee that there's even a property there. So that's one of my my blood pressure goes up when I say,
Sure.
really, you can't take your own risk. on that. You have to put it off onto the consumer. That I disagree with. So I mean, if you wanted to really do some legislation that I would agree with is tell people you got to take that risk.
Mhm. Um, we were introduced to the Tenant Act by our friends there on Irma Avenue. If I remember correctly, it was
Phil and Chuck has
yeah.
tried to get that legislation passed, or at least in front of our legislators, which would make it easier on eviction, which would make it easier on eviction, taking some of the burden off of prevention of renting. It's a very complex bill, but by reducing all the costs to get your property back from a tenant, uh, you'll see that people it would basically be like a hotel, right?
Okay.
If you're in a hotel, hey, if you can't make the next payment, you can't make the next payment, you're out, right? That gives the landlord a better idea of how long, or a safer, a less risk on them, because technically, with the eviction process, it takes up to 6 months. That's 6 months that you haven't been paid. That's 6 months worth of legal documents you've had to do. It costs you more to get somebody out than it does to keep them in. So it's complex legislation, but if you reduce that regulation on the landlord, it could also help uh, boost, bring down the cost of renting a property, because I know I don't have to go through so much legal battles if we dispute, and negotiation would be better because landlords would want rent, so they may take 4 weeks of $100. It's more than that, but maybe 4 weeks at $300 instead of taking the whole thing at one time. So very interesting legislation,
Right.
but it's not going to be seen because it works. It works for the consumer because it helps the landlord. Sometimes you have to help the owner have an incentive to rent it.
Right. And hopefully, in the legislation filed by the representative and the senator, will examine that particular option or solution, possible solution to make it less restrictive for landlords to be able to move forward with um, eviction and then being able to re-rent their properties or whatever. Maybe less um, regulation or less involvement with the courts, um, but everyone getting their due process
Mhm.
would be helpful. And maybe, like you said, reducing costs and getting more people housed. So I think that's something that we could explore with the representative and the senator if they are interested in our invitation to come on the podcast and
Mhm.
discuss this. I think if they want some movement and some clarity, it will be a good idea for their offices to commit to speaking to us about this.
Yeah, and I mean, you can always set aside. You can always set aside. We could get a solution to this by the end of the program if we do this right. But
Sure.
look, people all have hard times, and government should be there to help people when they're in hard times. So I think maybe a government emergency fund that can be tapped only a certain amount of times. Um, maybe because unemployment can't. If you're on unemployment, you're going to lose your house.
Sure.
You just There's just no way. I've looked at it up, up and down. I've tried to make sense of our unemployment system since the we had COVID, and Uh, we really looked at that. Yes, the Republicans did try to make it harder, so it made it really disruptive when we had an emergency. But those are things we need to look at as a state. How do we help the how do we help low income people, get a hand up in life, right? How do we help them transition to a middle class, comfortable area? We have to have certain, you know, Republicans have always been given a bad rap on this, but we've always tried to get programs to transition, not to stay on.
Correct.
And
Sure.
I think that's where the the funny part comes. Hey, well, they don't want you to. Well, we don't want you to live on unemployment. We want you to get unemployment so you to
Transition.
get the next job. But then we make it so difficult. Hey, you have to prove that you're applying for so many jobs each time and this and
Right. It's
hey,
more work
by the
than
time you're done doing all that, it's like, okay, I sat for 2 job interviews, but I spent, just as much time filling out your paperwork to make sure that I
right.
can get my next check. So,
Exactly.
you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Like, that just blows my mind how we do these things, but
Take out the restrictions, bring in the efficiencies. There's a better process. There's a better way. And
yeah.
the labor market here is different. It is very service based. Is based in the service and hotel and hospitality and theme park industries. However, there is wealth here. There are opportunities here in Central Florida, and bringing it all together so that even the lowest among us are brought up. There are solutions. It's just a matter of our elected officials getting together and stripping away those restrictions and regulations that are unnecessary,
Mhm.
and making the process a little bit easier for all of us. I like the intent behind the legislation. There are provisions in it that I'm scratching my head like, it's hard to get behind. There are provisions that
Mhm.
I do like. I do want the landlord to have their responsibilities and also the renter to have their responsibilities. Accountability for the affordable housing trust fund. Like you said, tap it a couple of times, prescribed times throughout the year for the purpose that why it was set up. Period.
Yeah,
Florida is a wealthy state. We have
I
resources.
so I will give you my final word on this. Look, we use the term predatory, practices.
Mhm.
I wanna know, I really wanna know what you mean by that. How many people are really in this predatory practice? I don't think there's that many people that are out there really preying on their tenants. So, uh, really, I wanna say walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. Republicans, $12 minimum wage, service industry job, transportation problems, the amount of hours you have to take to travel. I really want us to, as conservatives, look at that person's lifestyle and how they can afford, anything because, you know, we have to transition people from poverty to middle class. We got to do that by looking at what they go through. One ticket, one traffic ticket, you end up going onto the bus and you spend a license because you can't afford it. These these we have to look at fines, we have to look at the judicial system. Housing's not just one issue. It all combined. So David, thank you for bringing this up and Eskamani, thank you for introducing this legislation to get us having a discussion about housing and all the other issues that hurt our citizens here in the state of Florida.
In closing, I just want to talk about a specific provision in their proposed legislation, and that is protecting victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And uh, I just want to make sure that people are safe based on my past experience in the world of child protection, child and family services, and behavioral sciences. I get this. I understand that. Granted, approximately 75% of all allegations of child abuse and or neglect are unfounded. So that's facts. This is coming from 20 odd years in the business. Um, so we've got to be careful putting the burden on landlords to do certain things on a credible allegation versus a substantiated allegation. And also the level of evidence that we must take into consideration here. In child abuse cases, the level of evidence is very low to have a substantiated allegation of abuse and or neglect. That should not be the lowest standard for a landlord to act in certain cases and protecting not only the victims, but also protecting their vested interest in their property. I like the idea of if there's evidence of these allegations, a certain level is met. There's a credible investigation started, whatever level. That yet locks are changed. That makes sense, or the key code is changed by request. However, that request has to be based in a substantial level of evidence. We're getting into some very murky waters here,
Mhm.
and that has to be flushed out, and maybe in a separate piece of legislation. However, I think if there's some kind of cooperation between the landlord, who's not a party to those allegations, and the renter, there could be some of these things could be resolved outside of some type of legislation. But the intent is good. However, um, implementing these things is a different story. Let's see how it goes through the court, not the courts, through the legislation. And we welcome Representative Eskamani and Senator Victor Torres to be on our show to discuss House Bill 985 further. This will be a great conversation. The legislative session is starting in several days here
Mhm.
in January 2024. So this will be a great opportunity to discuss Keep Floridians Housed Act, House Bill 985.
Yeah, this
We
isn't a fair question. This isn't a fair question, David, but uh, I'll look it up myself. But do you happen to know how many committees this has to go through?
oh
Because it has to go. It's going to have to go. I mean, if it has a financial, if it has finances on, it has to go through uh, the Ways and Means, or it has to go through, but it has to go through housing. So it's going to have to go through a lot of different committees. So
right,
it could
and
die in any one of them.
I would think I know there.
Appropriations is what I meant to say. Not
I know that Representative Escamani was on Ways and Means or Appropriations in the last session. I don't know if that'll change as the ranking member. And I would think the same with Senator Torres being one of the veterans of the state Senate. I would think they would try to move this type of legislation through committees that they are the ranking members of to
Mhm.
kind of help move this process further. But
Well, it'd be
that's
something
something worth investigating.
worth watching. Yeah, I just popped in my head. I apologize for that. But everybody, those are the questions you should be asking. Like, share, please. Tell us what you're thinking. Ask us the questions we may not have asked. Tell us when we're right, wrong, or just have a conversation with us because we want to talk to you. Subscribe. That way you know what's going on. And David, again, thank you for this. Anna
Thank you.
Eskamani, thank you for this legislation to get us talking about this.
Thank you.